Hi all, Adi here from Hunts & Johns. As always, thank you so much for clicking on today's video. I'm in deepest, darkest Sussex and I'm at a little village called Horsted Keynes, and behind me you can see St Giles Church. It's got a very rich history, got some amazing original features still inside, and in this beautiful old churchyard we've got an ex-Prime Minister buried here, and also there's the grave of a tragic couple that died in World War II, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. So I'm absolutely freezing cold, so let's go and explore the church. Now, walking up the footpath towards St Giles's Church, you immediately get a sense of just how long this place has been part of the landscape here. Churches like this weren't just places of worship, they were the centre of village life for centuries. The church stands at an ancient crossroads where a settlement in the forest, originally to the north of the building, was called Horsted, a place where horses were kept. The circular earthworks to the northeast are evidence of a pre-Christian community on the southern ridge of the Ashdown Forest. And above the south doorway you can see this ancient sundial, and sundials were really essential back in the day, you know, helping the clergy and the villagers mark the hours of prayer, and this was long before clocks were commonplace, so it was a reminder of what time they were to go to church, etc. And there's this beautiful old door. I couldn't find a date on that. And stepping inside this lovely church, the first thing I noticed was on my left hand side there was a board listing the former rectors of St Giles. Now these lists are a fascinating record of continuity, generations of clergy saving the same parish, often over hundreds of years. It's said that 40 generations have been offered Eucharist in this building, and maybe even as many as 50 on this site, tracing back to the 7th century evangelising of Sussex by St Wilfrid. And just over here on the wall, I loved that there was several different languages of information offered. So there's several boards there and they're all offering some really helpful information about the church, so great for overseas visitors. And there's several beautiful stained glass windows, including some from the renowned artist Kemp, but this particular one is called Christ's Presentation in the Temple, and it was to commemorate former rector Christopher Rodwell, and he was from 1811 to 1888. And looking here towards the north, you can see the font. It appears to be medieval in origin and likely dates from the 12th or 13th century. But directly behind it, you can see one of the most important survivals in the church, and that is the original Saxon door. It is believed to be the only remaining Saxon feature here in the church from before the Norman conquest of 1066. The narrow proportions and simple constructions are typical of early Saxon architecture, although it had been moved on a couple of occasions when they were doing restoration works and extensions. And in between these two beautiful stained glass windows is the memorial to the former British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. Now he was in office from January 1957 to October 1963. He is buried in the graveyard, and we will go and see that at the end of the video. And straight ahead you can see this huge organ. And organs like this became increasingly common from the 18th and 19th century, reflecting the growing importance of music in church services. Isn't it beautiful? It's nice that it's still all exposed like that, so you can get quite close up to it. And then I noticed just on the left hand side hanging, you can see there's like instructions about its upkeep, which look pretty original to me. And it was lovely to see the Book of Remembrance. I always like to stop and pay my respects. So they're just details of souls from the armed forces who served their countries in the First and Second World Wars. And on the walls up ahead you can see the outline still of some of the old windows. And this beautifully carved wooden lectern. Lecterns like this became really popular apparently in the medieval period, and especially after the Reformation, and that was because the spoken word and reading from the scripture took on a renewed importance. Absolutely beautiful, this one. So the craftsmanship here is particularly striking, I think. Carved wood like this would have been so expensive and time consuming to produce, showing the value placed on preaching and teaching within the church. And now we're going to move into the nave, and as we look up here you can see these chancel arches which dominate the view, and these arches are architectural statements, and they used to mark the division between the nave where the congregation sat and gathered and the chancel, which was reserved exclusively for the clergy. And as we look up here and you can see the steps, that is the bell tower up above us. Now the scale of these arches suggests that there was some medieval rebuilding, and that was most likely in the 13th or 14th century, when many churches were enlarged to reflect growing populations in their areas and changing styles of the time. And as we go into the sanctuary here, there's a single wooden pew on the right hand side, and I couldn't find any information on it, but it was quite splendid, don't you think? Must have belonged to somebody very important. maybe it was like the clergy or a prominent local family. And there's loads of memorials in this sanctuary, and this one in particular, which is quite unique, was for Henry Pigot, who was born in 1715 but died March 1715, and it is to the babe who died before he was born. Never seen that before. There's some more memorials here. And some brasses. And then I found this stone coffin lid. I couldn't find out that much information about it. Apparently it's very likely to be medieval, possibly 13th century, and may have belonged to a high status priest or an important local figure. The size and the craftsmanship on it suggests that somebody of considerable importance were in the church. And as we look over towards the altar, above it you'll see a beautiful stained glass window by the artist Giles Church, and it's called the Crucifixion window. And Giles Church actually lived quite local to this church. Absolutely beautiful piece of work. And just to the right of the altar here, you can see the piscina. And a piscina was used for washing sacred vessels after communion. And this is said to date mainly from the 13th and the 14th century. But that carved angel at the top holding the Eucharist, this piece is believed to have been rediscovered during Victorian restoration work, when many medieval features were uncovered after centuries of alteration or neglect. And I believe this is a little carved figure of St. Giles, and that's more than likely a picture of him as well. It might not be. So I'm not an expert, but this is the most interesting thing. So this is called a Little Crusader, and it's the statue of a knight in the recess of the north wall. It's said to date from about 1270, and its size suggests that it was a heart shrine. So when such crusaders died abroad, apparently their mummified hearts were sometimes brought back to their parishes for burial. So he might actually be buried, or the heart might be actually buried underneath the chancel. And here they had a couple of commandment boards, and these would have dated from the post-Reformation period, when churches were instructed to display the 10 Commandments prominently as part of Protestant worship. And there's quite a few memorials around there, really interesting. A lot of them bear the same name, so obviously the prominent families in the area at the time. And here is another Kemp window, stained glass window, and this is the Nativity window, and it was made and installed in memory of Mary Benson, and that was her plaque that we saw on the wall when we came in. And here, mounted on the wall, is what appears to be the remains of a 14th century coffin brass, although their head is missing off it. Now the brasses used to be set into the floor, but many have been either removed or stolen, or some have been actually removed and rehung for preservation. Now we're going to head out into the churchyard, but before I leave I'm going to make a small donation to help with the upkeep of this remarkable building. If there is a direct link, if you want to donate directly to the church, I'll leave that in the description below, but if not, you can hit the Buy Me a Coffee link. Again, that's in the description, and then you can help support the channel and help support me make a small donation. So let's head outside and have a look around this really old, beautiful graveyard. And I have got a couple of really interesting graves to show you. And we're just going to head over now to former Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's burial site. So Macmillan served as Prime Minister, as I said earlier, from 57 to 63, and he guided Britain through a period of post-war change, decolonisation and Cold War tension. And he is perhaps best remembered for his famous phrase, "You never had it so good," capturing the rise and prosperity of Britain in the late 1950s. But despite reaching the very highest levels of power, Macmillan chose to be buried here in the village. And can you see my little robin friend here? He just came to say hello. Maybe that was Harold. Really cute. And we're just going to head over to this grave. It's absolutely heartbreaking, this story. So what makes it really unusual is it's a war grave, as you can see, Commonwealth, but the fact that the grave contains two people. So here lie Mr. and Mrs. Knapp, who were tragically killed on their wedding day. Can you believe that? During the Second World War. They were on leave from military service and they were walking home along the railway line after their reception when they were struck by a train. And I did read that there was a big thunderstorm that night and they didn't actually hear the train approaching. But how sad is that? 21 and 22 years old. So sad. And I found these really old graves. Look at the faces on those. Couldn't find a date on those. They were too worn, unfortunately, but I did think they were quite unusual. And here on the outside, you can see the beautiful spire, and you can see the outline of loads of old work and old buildings where the building has been changed so many times over the centuries. You can see there, can't you, like the shape, the triangular shape of an old roof. And this is the remnant from the old Saxon church, but from the other side, the old doorway. It's a beautiful graveyard. It's 8,000 years of history here, so some really old graves. If you're ever in the area, definitely worth a visit. Guys, wasn't that really interesting? So much going on for such a small little village church. And as always, thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy today's video, if you could please like and subscribe, I really would appreciate it. If you want to help support the channel, there's Buy Me a Coffee link down below, and I will see you for the next one. Might be a hunt, might be a jaunt, who knows. Bye for now.